March 1944, Italy. 7 months after surrendering to the Allies, Italian airfields resounded with growing American air might. From rebuilt Axis bases, the Allies were able to attack Nazi targets beyond the working range of bombers based in England. Out of the many sky battles, Allied air forces had gradually achieved air superiority. Now, theater air commanders, Generals Spaatz and Aker, arrived at Foggia to plan new strategy with General Nathan Twining, the 15th Air Force CG. Spaatz and Aker were handing Twining the biggest job his bombers had ever undertaken. The 15th Air Force soon got the news. They had been ordered to fly through Hitler's back door and destroy his oil industry. General Twining and his staff took on the job.
Gentlemen, we have just received a new directive establishing target priorities for the bomber offensive of the 15th Air Force. The decision has been announced. We will destroy oil refineries and synthetic oil plants. Now, Colonel Young, what does our intelligence show us in regard to these targets within our area?
More than 50% of the refineries and synthetic plants producing gasoline for the Axis are within range of the 15th Air Force. Between 25 and 30% of the total Axis production of gasoline is represented by the 10 large refineries around Ploesti. While these refineries were seriously damaged in the attack last August by the task force operating from Egypt, recent photo reconnaissance reveals that, with one exception, all refineries are currently operating at full capacity.
General, you've heard the problem. It's a big job we've got ahead. The knockout of Ploesti means the German will be deprived of 1/3 of his oil resources.
We bomber boys who moved up from Africa started the Ploesti air siege. On the morning of April 5th, 94, B-17 swung into formation. Close by were 136 B-24s. We were strong. We expected the enemy's coastal radar network in Albania and Yugoslavia to spot us as we made our approach over the Adriatic Sea. Although it was still early in our 600-mile run to target, we got into flak suits. They're a kind of insurance. Climbing to altitude, we skimmed the Yugoslav mountains. Mighty peaceful. Peaceful until they bristled with flak guns. We were soon to find out the hard way that Ploesti had become the third best defended spot on the continent. This was a high-altitude mission, 21 to 24,000 feet. As we neared the target, we edged into tighter formations. Each had top cover. We all remembered a 1943 Ploesti mission with 177 liberators in which we lost 54 planes. Would this be like last year's mission? This one might be worse. 250 enemy fighters, outnumbering ours 3 to 1, attacked. Fighters almost had enough. By the time we crossed the Sofia-Belgrade line, our lightnings moved in for the knockout punch. Then we ran into flak. 256 heavy guns filled the sky with black, deadly mushrooms. intense flak, the enemy had added smoke. We could almost smell the nauseating acid fog. 2,000 smoke pots effectively covered Ploesti. Accurate visual bombing was impossible.
At headquarters, they knew something had to be done. After many missions, the target was still effectively protected. On 10 June, operations decided on a new tactic.
We're going to dive bomb Romano Americano tomorrow using P-38.
For 4 hours, 1,200 miles, we buzzed the Balkans. The smoke screen had to be lit. We climbed a bombing altitude, and some of us dumped our wing tanks as we got close to the enemy. After hitting the refineries, we attacked German fighter units on the ground. Our P-38s got through the smoke. The mission was successful. We had destroyed 29 enemy planes and had damaged 3 refineries.
But the job wasn't done. Operations increased. Servicing went around the clock. The plan called for the bombers to be on target during the morning hours and stop Ploesti's working day. Now they prepared for 600 plane missions. They tried new electronic devices for blind bombing. Everyone hoped the sheer concentrated weight of tonnage would crack German and Romanian defenses. Ploesti sort of got under everyone's skin. After hitting it from the air, the flyers rehashed it on the ground. The men ate it, slept it, cursed it, especially the flak and smoke. The 4-month campaign since April had cost 1,900 men, the crews of 189 bombers and 41 fighters.
Early in August, General Twining called a meeting of our group commanders.
I've called you in today to discuss future air operations against Ploesti oil refinery. This strategic air force, during the next 3 days, will attack continuously, night and day, with maximum effort against all refineries in the area.
We got over Ploesti all right, but the enemy gave us a warm welcome. They rammed up more than 45,000 rounds of flak. That didn't stop us. During 3 days of smoky air siege, we lost 30 more planes, 23 to flak. But now we had over 100 Mustangs as escorts. The enemy jabbed, and our 51 swooped into the battle. Hit hard, enemy fighter strength fell apart. Displaying courage far beyond the call of duty, our boys drove the enemy into the ground. Flak kept our bomber crews on their toes. We waded through it all the way to the target. The full weight of our attack fell on Ploesti. That did it.
The steady pounding whittled away 90% of Romanian oil production. The global and greedy designs of an Axis dictator were consumed in a blazing, oily Ploesti. This was the crowning climax to our air siege. In only 5 months, this had become the graveyard for 1/3 of Hitler's oil. Oil, a pre-war weak point in the Nazi military supply system, became a bottleneck under repeated Allied blows. The bombs had crushed gasoline-producing, storage, and shipping centers. Vainly, Germany's 350,000 slave workers tried to repair the damage. But now all the refineries in the rich Ploesti cluster were damaged or knocked out.
We hurt them, but they hurt us too. The Ploesti campaign had cost us 270 heavy bombers, 49 fighters and their crews. Each plane and each man helped to shorten the war. As we hit the donut line, we were still flying the mission, and we wondered about our missing air crews. How many would come back? The answer came sooner than we had expected. 12 days after the last bombing of Ploesti, we got a real thrill. An airlift of 56 transport-converted B-17s were bringing back our buddies who had been forced down. Romania had surrendered to the Russians. In just 3 days, more than 1,100 returned as part of Operation Reunion. This was the first mass prisoners of war liberation. Of the first 600, only 10 were stretcher cases. All in all, considering what they'd been through, they were a light-hearted bunch. It was good to be back. Yes, it was a day to remember, that day at Foggia Airport. These were the first, and General Twining made it plain how glad he was to have his men back. He had planned something special. From his Coral Sea experience, he remembered what privation meant. First, he gave his men medical care and food. Then, Godspeed on their next mission. Their new checkpoint was the Statue of Liberty. Their target was home.
The 15th Air Force, by burning Ploesti off the target list, did more than merely destroy enemy oil production. They brought eventual disaster at compounded interest. The German war machine was stalled for lack of fuel. Later chapters will show Allied air power accurately blasting the vitals of the Axis with the hard-won bombing experience of the United States Air. Early 1944, East China. From key bases like Guilin, the small 14th Air Force accomplished miracles with the aircraft at their disposal. The frontier flying tigers fought the Japs with initiative, ingenuity, and superior tactics. General Claire Chennault's Air Force suffered chronic shortages. They had only such supplies as could be flown across the hump or replacement parts which they cannibalized from their own aircraft. Nevertheless, they did an amazing job of maintenance under the most primitive field conditions. Despite the lack of gasoline, equipment, and personnel, they ran effective fighter and bomber operations along a 5,000-mile front.
Then came June 1944, and the Jap offensive got rolling. When the Chinese armies could no longer protect our bases, we had to get out. During 7 terrible months, we had to evacuate 13 of our airfields. Even the modern ones, which thousands of Chinese had built for us under desperately trying circumstances. And so in East China, American bombs demolished American bases. While the 14th Air Force, tasting temporary defeat, regrouped at other bases in China, the 5th Air Force advanced in the Pacific. Liberators operating from captured fields like Biak now prepared the way for the Philippine campaign. Our mission was to neutralize the enemy on the islands we had bypassed. Our commanders, MacArthur and Kenny, felt there were too many Jap strongholds behind us and around us to be healthy. Air power had to remove the threat of enemy attacks on the flank and the supply line of our proposed amphibious landing. We were ordered to continually pound enemy concentration centers and sea lanes. In no previous Pacific operations did the preparatory phase cover such a vast area. To isolate the Philippines, our next battleground, we employed 4 battle-tested air forces. The 14th from China, the 5th, 7th, and 13th from Pacific Island bases like Biak, Anguar, and Morotai. Pacific warfare was island warfare. It was our job to cripple key bases in the shrinking Japanese empire. Our targets were enemy installations and the convoys supplying them. And so, island by island and ship by ship, we worked our way back to the Philippines. Dropping bombs from minimum altitude was no longer risky because of General Kenny's idea, attaching parachutes to fragmentation bombs. In this way, parafrags could be safely scattered on enemy targets in low-level attacks. As the enemy built new airstrips to protect the Philippines, our concerted attacks from distant bases pounded them to rubble. With these raids, we had softened up the approaches to the Philippines, and fulfillment of the promise to return was now in sight.
On 19 October, an Allied armada of combat and assault vessels maneuvered in Philippine waters. The Joint Chiefs of Staff had decided on Leyte as the invasion island. 2 great amphibious forces of more than 700 ships converged. MacArthur knew that Leyte defenses were heavy. Nonetheless, the 10th and 24th Corps of the 6th Army headed for shore on schedule. America was keeping her promise to return. 260,000 Jap troops were scattered throughout the islands. From Leyte to Luzon, they tried to stop the Allies from liberating the Philippines. Japanese resistance was in vain. Allied troops advanced from island to island. In each case, the Allied landings were skillfully effected with boldness and surprise, but stubborn and prolonged fighting usually followed in the hills.
It took 2 months of bloody battle to secure Leyte. By January 9th, we were fighting our way on Luzon, towards Manila. hills of Luzon were a problem ready-made for an air power assist. In cooperation with ground units, we flew tactical missions against Japs holed up in mountain caves. Ground radio control directed our bombing.
With the Japanese severely crippled, successive Allied invasions treaded through the Philippine archipelago to cut up Luzon. U.S. troops and Philippine guerrillas under MacArthur's direction fought many battles supported by General Kenny's Air Force.
Next came the Rock. Corregidor had special meaning for General MacArthur. He remembered Skinny Wainwright and his men who had suffered 5 months of battle, 28 days of siege, surrender, and the death march. For them, there was a score to settle. The most spectacular air action of the Luzon campaign was this pre-invasion bombing and recapture of Corregidor. General Kenny had proposed that it be retaken from the air. The Blitz started January 23rd with the 13th Air Force dropping 500-pound bombs. The 7th Air Force hit the target from Palau. Veterans of the 5th Air Force joined in hammering the Guardian Fortress of Manila Bay. Now, 50 troop-carrying C-47s from Mindoro headed for Corregidor. The proposed air landing was perilous and problematical. We were about to retake a citadel built before the war by Americans who tried to make it impregnable. We hoped that the month of continuous bombing had softened the Rock. 2,065 men faced the ticklish job of jumping into an extremely short and narrow area, a rugged target surrounded by sheer cliffs. The plan to drop on topside worked. We only found scattered opposition. But in making the perilous jump, 19 Americans were killed, 203 injured. The Corregidor return drama developed along the classic Allied pattern in the art of trimphibious warfare. All the tools and specialists of air, ground, and naval forces had been pooled together to achieve victory. On February 27th, organized resistance on Corregidor ceased. It was appropriate that on the same day, we returned control of civil affairs to the Commonwealth Government of the Philippines. Within the week, 12 American officers, all veterans of the fall of Corregidor, headed by General of the Army MacArthur, returned to the Rock. They came to pay formal tribute to troops of the 503rd Paratroop and 34th Infantry Regiments who captured it. In his remarks, MacArthur said, "Hoist the colors and let no enemy ever haul them down."
The road to victory was a long trek, over many bridges won by the combined strength of land, sea, and air.